We begin with those new reports of crews hearing underwater noises as they search for that missing submersible lost near the Titanic wreck.
Those noises were detected overnight by a Canadian aircraft that may have picked up banging sounds coming from deep underwater. This morning, the Coast Guard says it has redirected its search based on where those new noises were heard. But so far, those efforts have, quote, yielded negative results. The submersible Titan was last heard from on Sunday while diving to visit the Titanic wreckage. 5 people are on board, and with just 96 hours worth of oxygen available, it is a race against time to find them. We have full coverage this morning. In just a moment, we'll talk to marine scientist Dr. Gregory Stone about the challenges that the search crews are facing. But let's begin with NBC News correspondent Jay Gray, who's at the Coast Guard headquarters in Boston. Jay, good morning to you. What do we know about these noises that search crews say that they detected overnight?
Yeah, and Joe, let's start with the clatter that was heard from sonar beacons reported to a Canadian aircraft flying over the region, and that helped, as you talked about, to reposition some of the remote operated vehicles, underwater drones basically, that are searching for this sub. To this point, they have not found that. We do know that those noises are now being analyzed by U.S. Navy experts, so they're trying to piece together exactly what it could be. Subsequently, CNN has reported this morning that internal government documents show that teams actually heard banging noises every 30 minutes during a period of the search yesterday. And so that's given some renewed hope. But as you talk about, they've been unable to locate the sub at this point, and they're really up against it as far as time is concerned.
Right. I mean, Jay, there are so many challenges that searchers are facing. One is the weather conditions in the North Atlantic. Also, the fact this submersible, it doesn't have an emergency beacon on it. That's something that most ocean vessels do have to help rescuers locate them. Talk more about that.
Yeah, Joe, you're absolutely right. And look, they do have some rough seas at times there. It's very cold beneath the waters. They're dealing with a logistical nightmare and trying to rush equipment to that scene that will help with the process. And then you talk about some type of warning beacon. And what experts in the field say is that that's pretty commonplace for any vessel that's out on or below the surface of the water.
Jay, finally, obviously, we know time is of the essence. Yesterday afternoon, the rescue teams basically said they had about 40 hours of oxygen left. If they are even able to find the submersible before that oxygen runs out, they still have to get to it and bring it back to the surface. Talk about how tough that could be.
Yeah, Joe, that's the thing. All right, so let's assume that this sub is somewhere amongst the wreckage or near the wreckage of the Titanic. That's 2.5 miles below the surface. The assets that could be used at that depth are very rare and very tough to get down to that level, and they're still being moved to the scene. So we're at a point now where the estimates are about 24 hours or so of emergency oxygen left in that sub. You've got to get to it. You've got to locate it, pull it to the surface, and then pull it out of the water. Now, the U.S. Navy is rushing in some specialized salvage equipment to try and help with that ultimate process of pulling it out of the water. But again, you've got to find it. And remember, one thing they're dealing with as well at that depth is the pressure. It's 400 times what the normal pressure is at sea level. And so that's another factor in what can go down there and how they can accomplish this goal.
So many challenges right now. Jay Gray reporting from Boston. Jay, thank you so much.
Let's bring in Dr. Gregory Stone for more on this. He is the chief of ocean scientist for the Metals Company and the former editor of the Marine Technology Society Journal. Dr. Stone, good morning. We just heard a little bit about the challenges searchers are facing. Walk us through the search site near the Titanic wreck and the difficulties that presents.
Yeah, the Titanic is in the abyssal plain of the Earth's ocean, North Atlantic Ocean. The abyssal plain is actually the most common habitat on Earth. Most people don't realize, but there's a flat, muddy plain that covers 40% of the planet, and that's where Titanic sits, and that's where this drama is unfolding. And it's a flat, dark, cold place that is magical, but also very, very dangerous.
And you've been on dozens of deep-sea dives and explorations throughout your career as an oceanographer. Talk to us about what goes on when you reach a certain depth in the ocean. What kind of pressure is a vessel like this facing? Is there any possibility that it could float to the surface?
Oh, yeah. There's definitely a possibility it could float to the surface. Most submarines have various levels of self-rescue ability. One of them is floating to the surface, where you can release everything possible that you can from inside. There's usually levers and winches and screws that you can unscrew, and just until you're down to something quite small, a sphere that you might be in, and you might roll up like a ball. The Stockton is the engineer, someone I know, the friend of mine who designed the submarine. Though this is a new class of submarine, so I'm not sure what he had built into it. But generally speaking, the rescue of these things is just to get rid of all the weight. All submarines they're like a hot air balloon in the water. They drift down under weight. And then they have something in them that's buoyant. In this case, it's syntactic foam. Mm-hmm. It used to be diesel oil, because diesel oil is incompressible. And then when they're ready to come up, they drop weight and they rise back to the surface.
Doctor, you mentioned the CEO of OceanGate, Stockton Rush. You were once invited to go down into this submersible. What stopped you from taking that trip? My schedule was just busy. I would have gone otherwise. Okay. Even seeing what's happened here, you still would have taken the risk.
If I could, well, no, if I had the hindsight of today, probably not. But I did not see anything dangerous in the situation from that point when I was looking at it. Stockton was on the frontier of submarine design. He was looking at a new paradigm of how submarines are made and how they operate. So I liked him. He has a free spirit. He was creative. He was smart, and he just never gave up. And his idea is a good one, but we still don't know the full story yet about what happened.
Right. Doctor, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. President Biden's son Hunter is expected to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax offenses and 1 felony gun charge following a 5-year Justice Department investigation.
Prosecutors say the president's youngest son failed to pay more than $100,000 in federal income taxes in both 2017 and 2018. It's money that his lawyer says he did pay back. Under the deal, U.S. Attorney David Weiss's office will recommend probation instead of prison time. In a statement, the White House said the president and First Lady love their son and support him as he continues to rebuild his life. For more on this, we are joined by NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Kendelanian and NBC News legal analyst Danny Savallo. So, Ken, let's start with you. This is the first time the Justice Department has brought charges against a child of a sitting president. Break down these 2 charges for us, and what exactly is Hunter Biden saying that he's going to plead to here?
Good morning, Joe. Hunter Biden is admitting to crimes. He's admitting to willfully failing to pay his taxes in 2017 and 2018 on a lot of income, more than $1.5 million each year of income. They don't specify exactly how much taxes he owed because that's private information, but we've reported that he repaid or paid back more than $1 million 2 years ago in an attempt to settle this. So it was a lot of money, and he's admitted to crimes. At the same time, these are misdemeanors, not felonies. So the maximum penalty for each of these charges was 12 months in prison, and this is a plea deal that calls for no prison time whatsoever. It calls for probation. And there's another charge, a gun charge. He didn't disclose that he was addicted to drugs when he purchased a gun. That technically is a felony, but it's rarely charged. And so under this deal, he would enter a deferred adjudication program, and if he complies with the terms of that program, that charge will be dismissed. So in terms of a criminal deal, it's a pretty favorable deal for Hunter Biden, but it's really hard for us to evaluate it because we don't know what else the prosecution knew, what other conduct they could have charged. It was a negotiation behind the scenes, and now it's reached fruition. And at some point, Mr. Biden will have to go to that courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware, he'll enter a plea before the judge, and we'll find out whether the judge accepts the terms of the deal, Joe.
Danny, let's bring you into this. Ken just touched on this gun charge. What more can you tell us, and could he potentially face jail time on that charge?
He probably won't, because he's entering into a diversionary deal, which we've got to get real here, folks. Pretrial diversion in the federal system is rare. I've never had it in any of my federal cases. It happens all the time in state court, but in federal court, for the most part, they're all felonies, and they all involve prison time. You can get straight probation, but you don't see a lot of misdemeanors in federal court, and you don't see a lot of pretrial diversionary cases. So no matter how you cut it, this is a good deal. And I chalk that up to good lawyering, because it appears, at least from what's been reported, that Biden's attorneys raced to the government early on to negotiate a deal. And the evidence of that is that the deal was announced at the same time as the charges. On the gun charges, it's technically true that this subsection of the federal firearms law is rarely charged. But overall, these kinds of charges under this statute are brought all the time. And the average sentence is about 55 months for these charges under the felon in possession law. But here's the thing. When I talk about felon in possession law, that includes the umbrella of an actual felon in possession of a firearm, which is much more provable than, say, a user of illegal drugs, which is harder to prove. And Ken is exactly right. That particular subsection is not brought as frequently. So there's a lot of data here to sift through, and you can really look at it two different ways. But the bottom line is pretrial diversion, an amazing deal.
It is impossible to avoid the politics here, so we have Republicans weighing in. They're critical of this deal. They say it's a sweetheart deal. It's a slap on the wrist. What's the reality here legally?
I don't know why the word sweetheart has become, foul language in the last 24 hours. There's nothing wrong with saying this is a fantastic deal. There's nothing wrong with saying Biden's lawyers did a great job negotiating this deal. But you can also make the case that this particular subsection, a user of drugs, of illegal drugs, is not brought as frequently. So you could make the argument that Biden had a magnifying glass on him that other folks might not have. It's interesting. In just the last couple of weeks, we had another high-profile guilty plea to a user of marijuana in possession of a firearm. And that was the mother of the child who brought the gun to kindergarten and shot his teacher. She pleaded guilty also. So we've had two high-profile cases in the last few weeks. But, the data is in, and the federal sentencing data, they keep robust numbers. You can look them up. They're publicly available. And the bottom line is the vast majority of offenders charged with this statute, not this particular subsection, this statute, get prison time, and they get pretty significant prison time. This particular subsection, not charged as often. But the bottom line is this is a great deal, and I don't know why it seems to be so forbidden to say that, because there's nothing wrong with defense attorneys negotiating a great deal for their client.
Ken, quickly here, Hunter Biden's case was handled by a Trump-appointed prosecutor. We know that these court documents don't mention anything about those alleged ties to Ukraine or China. Is this the end of the investigation, or is there something else there?
Well, the prosecutor, Valerie, said in his statement that the investigation remains ongoing. But it's pretty clear from what Hunter Biden's lawyers are saying and from other reporting that we've done at NBC News that as far as Hunter Biden is concerned, this is the end for him in terms of legal exposure. But there may be other elements, other related conduct, other people that David Weiss, that Trump-appointed U.S. attorney, continues to investigate as part of this overall case. But there's no way that Hunter Biden's lawyers would have cut this deal and agreed to plead guilty if they thought he was facing further charges, guys.
All right, Kendelanian and Danny Savalos, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Now to the latest on the legal trouble surrounding former President Trump. The federal judge presiding over the classified documents case announced Trump's trial is scheduled to begin in mid-August. NBC's Garrett Haake has the latest as the former president begins laying out his case.
The federal criminal trial of former President Trump over his handling of classified documents has been set for August 14th. Judge Aileen Cannon scheduling 2 weeks for the case. And now the Republican presidential frontrunner previewing his defense on Fox News.
I have every right to have those boxes. This is purely a Presidential Records Act. This is not a criminal thing.
Mr. Trump was pressed. Since he had already given some classified documents back to the National Archives, why not hand over the rest when he was subpoenaed?
I want to go through the boxes and get all my personal things out, and I was very busy, as you've sort of seen. These boxes were interspersed with all sorts of things, golf shirts, clothing, pants, shoes. There were many things. I would say much more, not that I know of.
The indictment says the boxes, stacked up in a storage room, bathroom, and ballroom, also contained hundreds of classified national security documents. The Presidential Records Act requires outgoing presidents to separate out personal material before leaving office. Mr. Trump also denying the existence of a military planning document the indictment alleges he was recorded showing to a writer and acknowledging was still classified.
They were copies of articles and magazines. There was no document there.
Legal experts say the trial's start date is likely to be pushed back due to the case's complexity, possibly landing it right in the middle of presidential primary season.
Garrett, thanks so much.
Now to the latest on the severe weather that we've seen in recent days. Many communities are still recovering after a series of deadly tornadoes swept across Mississippi. You're going to see some of that damage here in a moment.
Meanwhile, severe weather threats continue today for different parts of the country. Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us with those details. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. We've got another area that could see potentially some strong storms developing later into the afternoon hours and continuing into the evening hours as well. This is going to stretch from basically Wyoming to Texas. It does include those main hazards, once again, being the large hail up to baseball size, as well as those strong wind gusts up to 75 miles per hour. We can't rule out a tornado or two, but that threat is on the lower end through the day today. Here are the areas that we're really going to watch for those larger, that larger hail to fall. Again, places like Wichita Falls, up into portions of Cheyenne. Those are the areas with 2+ inch hail that could potentially be falling. Now, as we switch gears and talk about the rain, we're going to be dealing with repeated rounds of some of this heavy rain as it works through parts of the southeast. And that's all thanks to a slow-moving system that's going to take its time working through this region. Right now, 13 million people are under this flood watch that you can see extended from places like Virginia all the way down into the northern portions of Florida. There's the system that we're mentioning. And you can see all of the moisture that's going to slowly but surely work into parts of the mid-Atlantic. It continues to be draped across the parts of the southeast as we go through the day today. And it doesn't stop as we get into tomorrow. We'll still see the soggy conditions lasting for a couple days in parts of the northeast as well as the mid-Atlantic and extending down towards the southeast. That's what we're going to be watching as far as the rainfall for this area. And you can see upwards of maybe 1, 2, even 3 inches of rain for widespread areas, but localized amounts up to 5 inches will be possible, hence the reason for the flood concern in the coming days. And that heat in Texas and beyond, we really haven't seen a whole lot of improvement with that. 25 million people are included in this, and it does include places like Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas, and Louisiana. We eventually will start to see a little bit of a break, and I say only a little bit because look where we go through the day today. Triple digits in a lot of places. Actual temperatures 113 in Del Rio, 101 for Brownsville, but feeling like 116. As we get into tomorrow, not a big improvement, but notice what happens in Dallas. We do at least get down to those low 90s. That's as good as it's really going to get for folks in places like Dallas, Houston, Alexandria. If you're in Laredo, you're ending up at 109 for the long haul. This is going to be a couple more days that we're going to see these really oppressive heat stick with us in that area. Those same kind of warnings will last here. And of course, we've got to take a moment to mention Tropical Storm Brett, guys, moving 60 miles or at 60 mile per hour winds, moving west at 16 miles per hour. No longer expected to become a hurricane. Still going to be impactful for parts of the Caribbean. So we'll be monitoring that as it enters the Caribbean Sea.
All right, Angie, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.